Alright, so in this video we're going to glue up a slab. This particular slab that I'm gluing up is actually going to be a checkerboard end grain cutting board. It's not a perfect checkerboard, obviously. It has some different colors going on here, but first thing you want to do is get a layer of glue on your piece and simply spread that glue around. Make sure you cover the whole surface area. I like to squish the two together, kind of slide it back and forth a little bit. For this particular board, I want to line up my walnut here in the center. You don't usually have to get it so precise, but these lines get a little weird if you don't line them up just right. And I just add some glue to each piece, and I keep on going right down the line. Glue is a little on the thin side, so I imagine we're going to have a good bit of squish out. When you're doing a slab like this, you do want to have enough glue. In kindergarten, they try to tell you to just use the tiniest bit of glue so that you don't waste glue and get glue on everything. But when you're gluing together a bunch of boards like this, or you're doing some kind of slab, you want to make sure that you have the surface area completely covered with glue so there's no air pockets in there, and you have a good bond all the way across the entire surface area. So that's why you see me kind of do that little squish back and forth. And I've got glue coming out the whole way across there. It looks a little dry down at this end, so I'm just going to pop it apart and add a little more. If you wanted to be a little more thorough, you could even go as far as adding glue to both surfaces. I know there's plenty of woodworkers that do it that way. I find that if you're generous on one side and just kind of do that smearing back and forth, it sort of spreads it around plenty for you, and that looks a little bit better than before. So we're just going to get this all on here. This slab's not real wide. If it was a lot wider, I'd probably have 3 clamps going across the bottom. Typically, if you're doing anything that's, I don't know, around 2 feet or less, I'd say 2 clamps on the bottom and 1 clamp on top is pretty sufficient. If it's wider than that, say 30 inches or so, I would make it a little bit, well, use 3 clamps instead of just 2 on the bottom. And then on the top, since you have 3 on the bottom, you would probably use 2 on the top. Pocket there. Now, if you're careful while you do this, you're only going to get glue on one finger. I've seen people do this with a little paintbrush or even a roller if you have a large surface area, but I just use my finger. It works plenty fast. Just make sure that you have enough glue on there. You don't want it to be dry. Don't worry about the glue running out on the bottom side. That's why I have the plastic down, so that the plastic can kind of absorb any of that may squish out on the bottom. And now suddenly my glue has gotten a lot thicker at the other end. I had a dry spot in there or something. going to slide the far end of my clamp down. I try to keep these clamps relatively close to the outside. Just checking that center line again, making sure we're pretty lined up. If it's not perfect, someone's going to notice. Ooh, that one's off there. Okay. I'm going to try to hold as many of these down flat as I can. And I'm just kind of making it snug right now. And I'm going to go ahead and get a third clamp and put it on top. The reason I'm getting a third clamp on top is to keep the center pieces from actually lifting up and buckling out of there, which this one right here is actually already doing a little bit. So I'm just going to loosen that clamp, try to tuck that back down in there. And go get that third clamp. This is probably going to be hard to tighten because these three clamps are so close together, but there's just enough room in here to get it to spin around. And that's pretty much it. Don't be afraid to tighten these clamps about as tight as you can get them. When you set up your clamps initially, you definitely want to set it up so that your clamps are sitting as flat as possible and the handles are over the end of the table. If your handles are on top of the table at the other end, you're going to have a hard time adjusting them. Also, you want all your handles on the same side of your slab. If you have two handles at this end and one handle on the other end, when you go to stand this up or lean it up against the wall to dry, it's not going to sit as even. I was always taught, and I always tell my students to sit it up on top of the handles because they're not going to dig into the ground or the floor as much because they have rounded knobs on there. I've never had any issues with handles bending, and I have glued some pretty heavy, large slabs. Just don't drop it, and I don't think you'll have any issues with that. All right, that's gluing up a slab.